All right, so now we're going to take a look at solving absolute value equations. Now remember, the absolute value is a distance a number is from 0. The absolute value of a real number a is broken down into two different parts or pieces. The absolute value of a is equal to a if a is greater than or equal to 0. And the absolute value of a is equal to negative a if a is less than 0. So for instance, the absolute value of 5 is 5, and the absolute value of 0 is 0. But if the value inside the absolute value is less than 0, such as absolute value of negative 9, it is the opposite of 9, which is just positive 9. Properties of absolute value. The absolute value of a is greater than or equal to 0. Okay. The absolute value of a is equal to the absolute value of negative a. For instance, the absolute value of negative 4, well, that's 4. And the absolute value of 4 is 4. And 4 does equal 4. All right, the absolute value of a times the absolute value of b is equal to the absolute value of ab. For instance, if I do the absolute value of negative 2 times the absolute value of 3, that's the same as the absolute value of negative 2 times 3. Well, again, the absolute value of negative 2 is 2 times 3 is 6. That is the absolute value of negative 6 on the right side, and we know the absolute value of negative 6 is 6. And we could do a similar argument for the division also. All right, so now I want to start solving absolute value equations. So now let's take a look at the absolute value of x is equal to 4. Now remember, it talks about numbers that have a distance from 0. In this case, I want it to be a 4. Right? So we know the distance from negative 4 to 0 is 4, and we know the distance between 0 and 4 is 4. So in this case, I can write x is equal to 4, or x is equal to negative 4. Okay? So in general then, if the absolute value of x is equal to a, then x is equal to a, or x is equal to negative a. Okay? All right, so then let's solve some of these other absolute value equations then. Remember, if I'm dealing with absolute value equations, I'd like to get the absolute value bars by themselves so I can use the property that we just completed above. So what do? Subtract 5 for starters. Never distribute inside the absolute value bars. So instead, I'm going to divide by 2. All right, two different equations. Okay. Now, add the 4 here, and then divide by 3. So one solution is 8/3. Add 4 here, and then divide by 3. So my two solutions in this particular case are going to be 8/3 and 0. Now again, just like any other type of equation, you'd like to check to make sure it works. I won't do that here in the video, but you can rest assured that they both work. Okay, now let's go over here then. Now, with the absolute value, one option is just to drop the absolute value bars. Now, that's also saying that if I put a negative in front of both, as I will do above, okay, I can divide both sides by -1 to get what I haven't read here. So that's one equation. Now, the other one is, similarly to what we've done before, just put a negative in front. But keep in mind now that I have to distribute the negative for that, but we'll come back to that momentarily. Okay, solving this equation here, okay, I'm going to subtract the 3x, I will then subtract the 1. Then I'll divide both sides by -6, which again we can reduce to -1/2. Okay, for my other equation, I'm going to distribute the negative. Now I'm going to add 3x. The problem is when I add 3x, I get that ugly thing where 1 is equal to -4. That is not a solution here. So in this case, I only have one solution, and that is -1/2. Okay, so let's do an equation that's quadratic. Again, same type of deal. To drop the absolute value bars, one of them is going to equal 6. The other one's going to equal -6. Okay, let's go to the left. Subtract 6. So this is a quadratic equation. I should be able to factor factors of -12 that add up to be -1. That's -4 and +3. -4 times 3 is -12. -4 plus 3 is -1. Set each factor that contains a variable equal to 0. So 2 of my solutions are 4 and 3. Again, you should always go back and check your answers to make sure that they both work. In this case, they both work. Okay, other equation, add 6. Now, keep in mind, this is not a difference of two squares problem, but I can take a greatest common factor of x out. Now this makes it very simple. X equal to 0 and x equal to 1. So my solutions then, I have 4. -3, 0, 1, and 4.